Originally.
All right, thank you, Cameron. And I am ready for some mint chocolate chip ice cream now. It's made me very hungry. Okay, let's see. Make sure I'm sharing the right screen. Okay, Cameron, is it working?
Yep, you're good.
Okay, great. All right. First off, as Cameron said, my name's Kelly Boysen. I currently serve as the Assistant Vice President for Campus Safety at the University of Houston. In my newer role, I've been in this role for about 2 years now. I oversee the offices of Fire and Life Safety, Environmental Health and Safety, our Office of Emergency Management, and also now our new group of occupational health that started since the COVID-19 pandemic. So before that, however, I was the Director of Emergency Management here at the University of Houston, and we've had a very busy decade or so, responding to lots of different types of events, which I will talk about in a little bit. I'll share a little bit more in detail about my background, but I came into emergency management a non-traditional approach, I would say. My bachelor's is actually in meteorology. And then I have a master's degree in applied geography, where I did all natural hazards and emergency planning research. That's what my thesis was centered around. And then I also relatively recently acquired my CEM, my Certified Emergency Manager from IAEM. I'm sure you all are quite familiar with their certifications. It was a bit of a long road, so I'm also going to share a little bit about my path. Thank you. I'll share a little bit about my path to doing that. So here's kind of my outline, talk a little bit more about my background, and then I'm going to tell you guys just some stories about doing emergency management at a university or a college. There's definitely some very unique and exciting things, so I'll touch on that and then talk about CEM, and then I will certainly allow time for questions. So if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to ask. So a little bit about my background. Like I said, I'm actually a meteorology major originally, so I was a weather nerd growing up. I was originally born and grew up in Galveston, Texas, which is an island off the coast of, well, not far from Houston. It's about an hour from here, but right there on the Gulf of Mexico. And so the weather nerd that I went off to get my bachelor's degree in meteorology out in Daytona Beach at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. And then in shifting to emergency management, there were a couple, I would say, catalysts, a couple events in my life that really, got me really interested in the emergency management side of the house. So one of those was Hurricane Rita. And I'd like to just tell a little bit about Rita, because it was an incredibly significant event down here in the Houston area, but not for the reasons that you might think. So Hurricane Rita was back in 2005. This is actually this satellite image here on the slide is actually Hurricane Rita back in 2005, once it made its way into the Gulf of Mexico. And so just to kind of give you some context, this is about 30 days after Hurricane Katrina devastated New Orleans. And so here comes Hurricane Rita into the Gulf. In this picture, it's a Category 5 hurricane, and it actually broke the records that Katrina was the strongest storm on record by barometric pressure. Here comes Rita, it breaks that record. And of course, another storm, the same 2005 season, actually ends up breaking Rita's record. But anyhow, at the time, strongest storm on record, and the path is headed straight for Houston, Texas. And so there were, of course, some mandatory evacuations ordered. And then there were also a lot of people who evacuated who were not in evacuation zones. And we're talking orders of hundreds of thousands of people who evacuated not in evacuation zones. And so, what resulted was basically a catastrophic traffic jam all the way from Galveston, Houston, up to Dallas, San Antonio, you name it. And people spent hours and hours on the roadways. And when I say hours, I mean like 30 some hours for a drive that typically would take 4 or 5 hours. And so during that time, people ran out of gas, their cars overheated. There was a heat wave going on at the time. And so what ended up happening with this storm is that it actually shifted to the northeast. It made landfall in the Texas-Louisiana border, and it weakened significantly. So it actually made landfall as a Category 2 storm and basically spared the Houston-Galveston area. And when everything was said and done, there were more people who died during the evacuation than as a direct result of the storm. And I think it was somewhere around about 110 people lost their lives. And so this event, for me, I remember it very vividly. And I just remember thinking, that we could do a lot better. I got really interested in questions like, how do people interpret warning information, different behaviors? Why do people do the things that they do? And how can we communicate better? How can we plan better to prevent something like this? So that was another, really just one of the big catalysts for me to just kind of be more interested in the emergency management and really planning side of the house. So I went off to graduate school. I graduated with my bachelor's in spring of 2009. So it was right after the 2008 recession had started, and jobs were really hard to come by, especially in the meteorology field. The National Weather Service had entry-level positions that they were giving offers to folks with PhDs. So lots of meteorologists in the field and very few jobs. So that's partly why I made the decision to continue my education at that time and go on to graduate school. If there are any seniors on this call, I know things with the economy may look bleak again, so I'll just say hang in there. It is possible to still make your way even if you're graduating in a recession. So don't lose hope. So anyhow, I went to graduate school, and like I said, I studied all things about natural hazards and emergency planning for my research focus. I also did an internship with it was actually Harris County, so the county that Houston resides here. And that really solidified, this is exactly what I want to be doing. I love the emergency management field. And then after finishing grad school, I joined the University of Houston. They were starting a brand new Office of Emergency Management. And I came in as their very first emergency management specialist in the office to basically help them build the program from the ground up. And then after serving in that role, I got promoted to the director and did that through 6 federal disaster declarations. So we've definitely been busy. So let me tell you guys a little bit more about the University of Houston. So kind of shifting gears here. So we are a pretty large institution. We've got 47,000 plus students, 8,000 students who live on our campus. We're a tier 1 research university, so we have a lot of research activity, and it's been growing significantly just in the last 5 years. And then geographically, I'm sure you guys know where Houston is, but you see that we're right there on the Gulf of Mexico. So this is hurricane country down here. That's what a lot of people, I would say, before COVID and before a winter storm, that's what people, when they hear Houston and the folks down here, that's the only disaster they act like that we ever get. But since 2015, we've had 6 federal disaster declarations. and we're tired. Emergency managers are tired down here. But we have had several catastrophic floods, and then of course Hurricane Harvey, which I will talk quite a bit about today. And then I don't know how much you all saw of our winter storm that we got last February that impacted the entire state of Texas. I know that us Texans down here, these freezing temperatures, we're not used to that, but it really was a very, very serious event just because, one, our homes are not designed, to withstand those kinds of temperatures, and with the cascading events of losing power for several days, our homes are designed to keep heat out. So when we're trying to, pump our pump our heaters, and like I say, they're not designed for that. And then when we lose power, then the heater's not working. So it was a very serious event, and unfortunately, this is really pretty mind-blowing. But during that event, there were quite a few people who lost their lives and in their own homes. So I could go on and on about things about the power grid and whatnot, but we won't do that today. But there's definitely a lot of lessons learned, for the whole state in that regard. And then, of course, the COVID-19 pandemic, we've been incredibly busy with that response. I say 2020 to question mark. Who knows when this one's going to end, but we definitely have been running that response for the last 2 years. So let me give you a little bit just of background about the Office of Emergency Management here on campus. It's a small group, and it hasn't been around. We've been around a little bit over a decade. There are 3 full-time staff, a director, and 2 specialists. We do all the typical things that you would see at like a city or a county Office of Emergency Management in terms of planning, doing training exercises, outreach. We have our own emergency operations center on campus. There's larger universities will have their own EOC, but it's not super common. And then we do work large special events on campus. I will talk more about that. And then, of course, one of the things I'm really big on is after action reports and improvement planning. So essentially, after the incident is over, we do the full after action review process to try to learn what we can do better next time and what strengths we can build upon. So very similar to city or county. However, there are some other things that are unique, some unique aspects of doing emergency management at a university. So I'm going to touch on a couple of those. This picture is actually it's an old picture. It's back from 2017. This was a picture of our emergency operations center during Hurricane Harvey. We've done quite a few upgrades since then. We have a nice fancy video wall, like you've probably seen if you've toured a nice EOC. So it's definitely gotten some upgrades, thankfully. But this is the room that we lived in for about a week while we were responding to Hurricane Harvey. So a couple of unique things. We are a city within a city, and within a very large city with our 8,000 residents that live on campus. And of course, we have to, they're first and foremost, we have to be ready to, take care of them, shelter them, and feed them, of course, during some very long duration incidents that we've seen over the years. We also, I mentioned we have a lot of research activity, and with that, we have a lot of hazards on campus. So we have a lot of chemical research, biological research, radiological research. We have critical research projects. So think really high dollar, federal grant projects that have to continue regardless if there's a flood or a power outage. We also have research animals on campus. And so, for example, we have primates, and we also have rodents, and fish are our most common research animals. And so we have a full veterinary team on staff at the university that their sole job is to take care of our research animals. And as an example of some unique resource requests during incidents, during Hurricane Harvey, and remember, this is a very long duration event, probably a period of about, the whole event was about a week, but think about 4 days where it was so flooded that nobody could drive on the roads and things like that. Basically only boats, could move around in some places. So our animal care operations unit, who takes care of the animals, they started to get low on baby primate formula. So this is for our infant primates, they were running low on formula for the monkeys. And so that resource request came into our EOC, and then we had to work with some local partners, who might be able to help us resource that, which we did find some, and we were able to get it. But, these aren't things you could just call up Walmart and have them send it to you. So, definitely very unique requests. We also, I talked about special events. So, aside from our football games and basketball games, we've also hosted some high profile events. Back in, I think it was 2015, we hosted the Republican presidential debate on campus. So really unique experience working with the Secret Service and things like that. And then of course, we also, we've got global risks, that we help some other departments on campus that really own these pieces. But because we have students studying all over the world, and then also faculty that go conduct research abroad as well. So there's definitely a global component as well. I talked a lot about these long duration events, but continuity of operations is huge for us. We have a very extensive continuity of operations planning program. So if anybody has questions about that, let me know. But that is something that we spend a lot of time doing on our campus because we have needed it. We activated all those pieces during Harvey, the winter storm, and then activated brand new pieces of our COOP as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm going to share a little bit about some of our experiences during Hurricane Harvey back in 2017. And so just to give you some context, this hurricane made landfall hundreds and hundreds of miles away from Houston. So south of us, and then it kind of made its way up the Texas coast. It made landfall as a Category 4, but then quickly downgraded, and it made its way up the coast very, very slowly. So it essentially was days on end of dropping just catastrophic heavy rainfall. I mean, if we just had the first day, we already had, horrible flooding conditions, but then we got like 3 more days of that same level of rainfall. And it was like it just wouldn't stop. So I'll show a picture here. One of our residence halls, there's lots of bayous in the Houston area, and Houston is incredibly flat, which creates a lot of problems if we get, a lot of heavy rainfall. So one of our residence halls is right on the bayou, and this image here at the on the bottom, this is showing the bayou a little bit further upstream in a different area, but you can kind of get the context for how deep this culvert is. And then the bayou actually runs right through here, and this is a road. So, I mean, you really can't even see where the bayou would start and, end or begin. And so during Harvey, we actually had to do this residence hall on the first floor started taking on water very quickly. And so we had to, unfortunately, evacuate students out of there in the middle of the floodwaters. So this is an image here of our police and our own police officers. We have our own police department on campus, so our own police and security officers helping some of our students to wade through the water. those who had chosen to stay in this residence hall. So, and then this is an image of how we moved those students into other residential spaces on campus. So I mentioned that we're a city within a city, and you can see with, the city just, covered in floodwaters. But at this point in time, all the 911 systems in the area were completely overwhelmed, and there were thousands of rescues going on all over the city. So one of the things that we always plan for at the university when we say we're a city within a city is that if there is a major incident here, there's going to be a lot of people who are going to need help. And so we can't just say, oh, well, our plan is to call City of Houston, or our plan is to call Harris County, OEM, and ask them for these resources and to bail us out. There are going to be a lot of citizens that need help. So we try to make sure that we are as self-sufficient as we possibly can with our plans and our resources. And so when we had to relocate these students, we used any and all of our available, our high clearance vehicles, our facilities vehicles, box trucks. We have our own giant garbage truck if we needed to use that. So, we basically used what we had on campus. And this picture shows another one of our main access points to our campus. So again, this is a road here, and this is a road actually going this way. So this is an intersection at a main access point to the campus. And just, there's definitely no way to get through here. So we had to, use our own means and our own personnel to do what we needed to do on campus during those several days. This is probably like one of my favorite pictures from the event. This is taken during Hurricane Harvey, but it just shows that, and you guys know this, when you take your incident command system training, that of your incident priorities, life safety is always number one. And so our, above property preservation and so on and so forth. And so taking care of our students who live on campus, that's our number one job. And I love, kind of the soft smiles on both of their faces because, we had to just continue doing our job, making sure that our students were safe and they were fed and taken care of. So, you see this picture and you maybe wouldn't know that, people have been stuck on campus, for days on end in the middle of a catastrophic flood, but, here we are. So, and I think the last thing I want to say about Harvey is to talk about our ride-out teams. So we have a very comprehensive ride-out team program on our campus. And so certain critical departments are identified, and their job is to help maintain the university's essential functions. And so these folks, we have rosters where team supervisors and who are going to be the members of the team, those are updated every single year, in advance of hurricane season. And so these are just, these are most of our, there's a couple missing here, I think, but these are most of our departments who have a ride-out team on campus. And so these are the teams we worked with throughout the week during Harvey, and frankly, for other incidents too, even during the freeze as well. The animal care operations group, that's the veterinarians on staff who are taking care of the research animals. And then you see some familiar ones, student housing, dining, of course, our police. Environmental health and safety is our fire marshal's office and our EHS office. So I think that wraps up about Harvey. So just a couple other examples of what we do in higher ed emergency management. I mentioned special events. These are some pictures here from we do have an on-site command post for our football games. So within our football stadium, and you see some pictures here. This one at the bottom, you get to see a little bit of the folks that are present in that room. So we have our own university police, we have city police, emergency management. We have fire marshal's office there. We have Houston Fire Department, and then we have our contract EMS service, contract security services. In this scenario, we would have athletics and event operations. And then these folks in the front of the screen, this is IT for the command post. And then this gal here, she's actually, she's our what we call virtual patrol room operator. And basically she's monitoring or pulling up the security cameras in the stadium. If we have a call come in of an incident, she pulls that up on the fly so that we can have an extra set of eyes in the command post. So we spend quite a bit of time doing emergency planning for large events and for commencement ceremonies and things of that nature. I talked quite a bit already about research, so I'm not going to belabor that, but having so many high hazard laboratories on campus, you know, having good lab shutdown procedures, whether it's in, you know, for a notice event like a hurricane is really important, or then having continuity of operations to prevent some sort of disruption. And, you know, just simple things like power outages are incredibly disruptive for research. And I mean simple things like, let's say you have samples that have to be in a refrigerator or a freezer, and they have to stay below a certain temperature, or you lose those samples. So it's a lot of training with the researchers to make sure that they have a continuity of operations plan, they have their equipment, you know, it's on a generator that's, you know, connected to the building and all kinds of things. So we actually have a whole planning process and a checklist to go through with them that they can use. And these last two slides, we also, we get to have a lot of fun too. So this is just an example of one full scale exercise that we did a couple years back in working with our local partners, HPD, HFD, and then also our Metro, which is the transportation agency here in the Houston area. And so this particular exercise was a collision between a light rail vehicle and a propane truck that also hit a electrical pole. And so that's why you see the downed power lines. And it was during, you can't see our football stadium in these pictures, but it's directly adjacent to this light rail line. And so it was all happened during a one of our football games was the scenario. And so we had to plan for a chemical release, a shelter in place scenario, and also a power outage. And so I was one of the leads on the design team from the university side. And so, like I say, we get to have a lot of fun with things like this. I mean, I always say you'd rather find the deficiencies in exercise when you're practicing than in a real world event. So we definitely do training and exercise. And then we also have CERT. I don't know if you all are familiar with CERT, Community Emergency Response Team. It's a national program, but we have our own CERT training that we do on campus. And then we maintain our CERT team. And then also, we also, I guess, well, it was before COVID started. So several years ago, we got the National Weather Service Storm Ready designation. You know, we were doing most of the things during our weather responses. So it was about time that we finally got it official and got our Storm Ready designation. So let's see. Okay, I'm gonna actually, Cameron, if it's okay, I'm gonna stop there for just a second before I change gears to talking about CEM. And I just want to pause and see if there are any questions related to higher ed, emergency management, or anything of that nature.
Yeah, sure. So that was really great to go through all of that. It was really interesting to hear about some of the stuff that you guys had to do specifically during Harvey. Because you know, us meteorologists, you know, over here we were watching it too, and we heard about, you know, like the baby formula for the monkeys and the the evacuations and stuff. So that was really cool to hear from your perspective. And we do have CERT as well, so
Oh, good.
we're very happy to be able to do that. And we are also Storm Ready certified, so we are
Awesome.
rooting on that part.
That's great.
So if anyone has any questions, feel free to either put it in the chat or unmute. I am going actually to start off with the questions.
Sure.
So our group, our IAEM, had the opportunity last semester to do a tabletop exercise. The officers and I ran it for our club members, and we had our Center for Disaster Research and Education professors were kind of lending their input. And we were working on a situation that was an active shooter during homecoming. So you mentioned like your full scale exercises that you had done before. How often do you guys do tabletop exercises, and are you able to get students involved with that? And again, this is kind of a multi-part question, but have you ever, done a tabletop exercise and then had to really, perform that response in real life as well?
Yeah, so we do, so typically we do about 2 tabletops a year. With COVID, we only did 1, I think the last 2 years, just because the teams were so busy. Yeah, and we typically, I'm trying to think if we have had students in those exercises. I know in our full scale exercises that we've done, and also all of our CERT drills, we have had student volunteers to participate. Most of our drills, we do take volunteers to serve as like our actors and our victims and things like that. So we have had students as players in that regard. But I don't really recall having students in our tabletop exercises. So generally our student affairs division, they typically will represent a lot of the student side of the house. But then we also, we have an emergency planning committee, and we get a representative from Student Government Association who participates on that. That's usually how we engage the students, is in the planning, just the emergency planning aspect. And then let's see, your other question was if we had a tabletop, if we did, there was a tabletop we did where it actually kind of came to fruition.
Yes, yes.
So we have done a number of, hurricane related ones, and those certainly have come to fruition. But that's boring because we do that all the time, right? We did participate in one functional exercise that was very interesting. This was a collaboration with the city and county, but it was a cyber attack. It was a very large scale cyber attack. And we now we didn't have, so again, to your point, we didn't have end up having a cyber attack, but what we had done previously, so this isn't quite with your question, but so we had recently done a plan where we could not access the university's emergency alert system. Basically we had a disruption. We didn't know what the scenario would be, but we had gone through the process. So this was more of a tabletop, I guess, is how it started. That if we did not have our emergency alert system, it wasn't working, we couldn't communicate to our campus community during an emergency incident, what will we do? What backups could we do? And then also we looked at it from an internal side, which was none of our emergency response, none of our ride out teams, none of us could communicate. A lot of times we use conference calls and so on and so forth. So it was like, what if our conference bridge wasn't working? What are we going to do? So we went through the process of coming up with a bunch of backups. And then we participated in this huge cyber. Now this was an exercise, but and they gave us that scenario, which was we could not use our emergency alert system because it had been compromised in this cyber attack. And luckily we were able to pull out that plan where we had all those backups that we'd identified and said, okay, well, this is how we can get out emails. This is how we can send out text messages through this alternate means. So that was a really exciting moment for us. Now I'm glad we have not had a cyber attack officially of that scale. So that's good. But that's the only thing that I can think of. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for answering that. Does anyone else have any other questions they want to ask before Kelly moves forward? I don't see anything.
Okay. So I will just do this last slide talking about CEM, and then if there are any other questions, I'll of course take those, and then we can close out. But so yeah, Cameron asked me to just talk briefly about my path to acquiring the CEM. And again, I'm going to say I may have taken a bit of a non-traditional path in getting my AEM. I got my AEM first and then the CEM. So I'll tell you guys, I had originally planned to go straight to the CEM, looking on paper at what the requirements are. And I kind of put them here on the left-hand side for a high level for you guys to look at. But, I basically had all the requirements. And so I thought, okay, well, I'll just go do my CEM, so I got started. I sat for the exam, I passed the exam. And then I started really diving into mostly I would say the professional contributions. And that's where you have to satisfy in 6 different categories of professional contributions. And when I started to look at that, I realized, wow, this requires a lot of documentation. And while I've done most of the things on here, the level of documentation that they require for the application is really extensive. And there were things that I had done, say like 5 years prior. It was like, well, I don't have any of that. I don't have any of that stuff anymore. So what I realized was when you take the exam, I don't know if it's still like this, but it probably is. When you take the exam, they give you 1 year to submit your application. Otherwise, you have to take the exam again. It's not just like you took it once and then you have 10 years to, apply for your CEM. And so when I realized, okay, this is going to be a lot more work to get this documentation together, I decided I didn't want to have to take the exam again. So I thought, okay, I'm going to go ahead and get my AEM, and then I will upgrade to the CEM. And so that's what I did. However, also not quite as planned. I got my AEM. I had planned to upgrade to the CEM, but I had my first child about 1.5 years or so later. So I was focused on him. And then when you recertify every 5 years. And so it was time for me to recertify for my AEM. I did that. And then IAEM does something, what I think is really cool. In that if you recertify for your AEM, within a 6-month period, they will allow you, if you're going to upgrade to your CEM, they'll allow you to basically use some of the training and some of the professional contributions that you submitted for your recertification, which is really great, because otherwise you have to do your recertification, which requires all these things. And then you would have to do all these things just for the CEM. But since they kind of give you this 6-month grace period to double dip, I chose to take advantage of that. And so I did my AEM recertification. And then within that 6-month grace period, I did my upgrade to the CEM. So, and now I'm working with IAEM to get set up as an official mentor. I've got 2 other folks I'm mentoring here at the University of Houston. And so just a little bit of advice on the certification. I would say, of course, first start with conducting that self-assessment to consider which certification to pursue. I really think that, many of you could probably easily qualify for the AEM. When the CEM, that's getting into, having full-time work experience. And then the professional contributions get pretty extensive. But the AEM, there used to be an essay that you had to write that was pretty lengthy. You don't have to do that anymore. So it's really just digging into the training, taking the exam, and then having 3 letters of reference. So I really encourage you guys, to consider looking at that AEM certification. And then, like I say, you can choose to upgrade within the 5 years before you recertify, or you could do what I did, recertify as an AEM, and then within the 6 months, upgrade to a CEM. So 2 other things I want to say. I mentioned the documentation, and what I mean is, like, let's say, you go to a conference, have copies. If they provide a certificate that has like continuing education credits on it, like CEUs, your hours, save that. If you have a conference that you go to, save a copy of the program. That one of the most common categories in the professional contributions is speaking. And that can be something like presenting at a conference, presenting to a group like this. The thing about it, though, is that they will not accept, you cannot just submit the program with your name and your presentation title, or that plus your PowerPoint. They will not accept that as proof that you spoke, because your presentation could have been accepted. You could have made a PowerPoint, but then you didn't show up and you didn't give the presentation. So this is what I mean when I say the documentation is really extensive. They will accept other things like a thank you letter from the conference organizer, or if you're working, your supervisor can write a verification letter to verify that you did certain things. But like I say, once I dove into the application, it's just as much more detailed documentation. And so as you're doing these things, save those things as you go, and hold on to them, because once you go to do that application, you're going to need that. And then if you are really interested in certification, I highly recommend IAEM's certification webinar series. They did this, last year, but the recordings are available on their website. And honestly, they're actually really good. I went through several of those when I was doing one of my last applications, and I found the content to be really helpful. So I would recommend that. And then, of course, if you're interested to find a CEM mentor, and that's all on their website as well. So I think that kind of covers that piece. And so Cameron, I think that's my very last slide. So let me unshare here, and then if there are any other questions, I'm happy to take those.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And yeah, that's some really good advice you had for us. So I really appreciate you sharing that. Joy, I see you unmuted. Would you like to ask a question?
Yes. I have 2 questions, both about the CEM. Where do you get the training hours? Are they just from like IEM training courses that they have like before the conference, or can they be from any conference? And the second question is, do you feel like the higher you go up in the profession, like the upper level jobs, that the CEM becomes necessary?
Great questions. Okay, so the first one about the training. So for your CEM, they actually CEM or AEM, they require 200 hours of training, and they actually split that into what they say is 100 hours from emergency management training, and then 100 hours from what they call general management training. So let's just talk about the emergency management side. You can get those from FEMA's Emergency Management Institute, the online classes. A lot of those will count. If you take other in-person emergency management classes, and when I say emergency management, it can be like continuity of operations planning, it could be mitigation planning, it could be recovery, it could be incident command system and NIMS. So the hard thing about and I guess let me say on the general management, and that can be things like leadership training, finance and budget, communication related training. The hard thing about the training is that they only allow you to have 25 hours in any one category. So let's just say on your emergency management training, if you say I have 20, let's say you have 40 hours in NIMS and ICS, but they're only going to allow you 25 in any one category. So it's a little bit of a jigsaw puzzle to kind of piece together your hours. That's something that I'm doing with the folks that I'm mentoring right now, as we're looking at all the training that they have and figuring out how we can piece those into the puzzle. And the thing I'll say, IAEM has what they call the training allocation table. That's on their website. If you find a training course, like let's just say it's ICS 100, they will have that on the table and how many hours they'll give you credit for that. You want to use trainings that are on that table if you can. If you take other training and it's not already in the table, it doesn't mean that you can't use it on your application, but you are going to have to provide additional documentation. So as an example, you take let's say it's a budget or a finance training. If it's not on the table, you need to provide like a syllabus or some sort of description of the course. Whereas if it's on the training allocation table, you don't have to provide any additional documentation, but your course certificate. So I hope that helps on the training side. And then your second question, I think it was the higher up you go in your profession, how important is that CEM? Is that right, Joy?
Yes.
Yeah. So I think the CEM is becoming more important all the time. When I first started in emergency management, I never saw it on job descriptions, job postings. I never saw it on there. Now I see it all the time. CEM preferred. I see maybe barely CEM required, but I do think that the profession is going to evolve. And I think eventually you will start, I think that's going to take a while, but I think eventually you'll start seeing things like CEM required or ability to acquire CEM within 2 years or something to that effect. So I think it's gaining a lot of traction. So I definitely, if you're interested in the field of emergency management as your career, I definitely think it's worth planning on how you can acquire it. Great questions, Joy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Does anybody else have any other questions? Well, then I have one final question for us to close out. What would be your advice to young professionals like us who are getting ready to go out there and get into the emergency management field?
Yeah, great question. And I'm glad you asked it. So a couple things. My number one advice is, and I'm sure you hear it from your professors, so this won't be anything new, but I can't harp on the importance of internships enough. I did several internships throughout undergrad and my master's. And actually in one of the situations, doing the internship helped me realize that there were things, and this was when I was doing weather, it was like, oh, well, these are things that I don't really like about the job. I don't really like doing shift work and, things like that. Whereas, and then when I did my internship in emergency management, it just solidified that that was exactly what I wanted to do. The other thing is, of course, it gives you real world experience on your resume, but then of course you're going to meet so many contacts. I still am very close with some of the emergency management colleagues that I first started working in this area with. And so the networking from that, of course, is really, really great. A couple of other things. Probably most of you have your basic NIMS, ICS, those courses that you can take online through FEMA's EMI. Those are pretty much standard nowadays for any type of emergency management job. So you might as well, if you haven't taken them, go ahead and take those and knock those out. And then of course I would recommend, but I don't need to recommend it to this group, but a student membership in IAEM, I would recommend that, but I don't have to tell you guys that. And then the other thing is, because I think the hardest thing about landing a job in emergency management is that a lot of the entry level positions say they require 2 or 3 years of experience. And so when you're graduating, and entering the career field, well, it's hard to really break into that if you don't have, a couple years of experience. So I recommend the internships to try to help build that. And then also volunteering. There's American Red Cross chapters. You guys knew about CERT. Some states, I'm not sure about Pennsylvania, but some states have a state guard, which is like a volunteer military force. We have that down in Texas, and I served in the state guard for 6 years. I basically did communications and radio interoperability, and we used to deploy to disaster sites across the state, or do training exercises. So, just kind of be creative and look into some volunteer opportunities where you can try to get some experience for the resume, but then also meet some good folks, good contacts in the field as well. So that would be my advice, Cameron.
Awesome. That is great advice. And luckily we do have partnerships through Millersville that allow us to do volunteering. We have one of our members just accepted a full-time job with the American Red Cross as an emergency manager, disaster specialist, I believe, with them. And our secondary advisor is head of our Blue Rock Emergency Management, and it participates in our South Central Task Force, which is like the state guard that you mentioned before.
Super.
So, does anyone else have any questions for Kelly? All right, well, Kelly, thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate you speaking with us. You had some really awesome perspectives on what it's like to be an emergency manager, especially at a university, which is something a little different that we were able to hear from. So we really appreciate it.
You bet. Thank you so much for having me. I enjoyed speaking with you guys. And my contact information was on the last slide. But if you missed it, just reach out to Cameron. She knows how to get in touch with me if you have any questions after today.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much again. Everybody else, I will speak to you soon, and have a good night and have a happy St. Patrick's Day.
Go enjoy some mint chocolate chip ice cream.
Yes, enjoy that mint chocolate chip ice cream.
All right. Take care. Thank y'all.
Bye.
Bye-bye.